My name is Erica Shaw. I am 34 years old, and I built a tech empire in Boston, starting from nothing. People know me today as a successful entrepreneur, but few understand the emotional scars beneath the surface. Growing up, I lived in the shadow of my younger sister Julie, always playing second fiddle in a family that made no effort to hide their favoritism. I always assumed the gap between us was emotional, but what I uncovered later was far more calculating. A legal document arrived one morning, crisp and official, and it shattered any illusions I had left. It wasn't just paper, it was a declaration that even my achievements weren't mine in their eyes. Before I explain how my own parents attempted to seize what I built with my own hands, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if you have ever felt abandoned or betrayed by the people meant to protect you, hit that subscribe button. I grew up in a quiet, working-class suburb of Hartford, Connecticut. Our home was a small 3-bedroom house, with weather-worn shutters and a tired backyard, where my dad tried and failed to grow tomatoes every summer. My parents, Martha and Richard Shaw, lived modestly. Mom worked at a dentist's office, and Dad sold furniture at a mid-sized showroom downtown. We never went hungry, but we never had much extra either. From as early as I can remember, the rules were simple. Julie was the center of the universe, and I was the orbiting moon. She was 5 years younger, but even at that age, she got everything new. When Julie started school, she got brand new clothes, neatly coordinated outfits, matching bows, pristine shoes, and a monogrammed backpack. My first day of kindergarten, I wore my cousin Melissa's faded jumper stitched at the seam the night before by Mom. I asked why I didn't get anything new. Her answer never changed. "Julie's more sensitive about her appearance, honey. You're easier." And that phrase, "you're easier," followed me like a ghost. When I got straight A's in 6th grade, Dad muttered, "Nice going," without looking up from his paper. The next year, Julie brought home a B pun in math, and they took her out for ice cream to celebrate her big improvement. I joined the middle school softball team, and made it all the way to regionals. Neither of my parents attended a single game, but when Julie had ballet recitals, they sat front row even if Dad had to cancel client meetings. Birthdays and holidays made their favoritism almost comical. My 10th birthday was a plastic-wrapped grocery store cake and a $20 gift card to the bookstore. Julie's 10th birthday, a full-scale princess party with face painters, custom decor, and a brand new gaming console. I smiled for the pictures, but I locked the bathroom door that night and cried into a towel so they wouldn't hear me. The only person who ever truly saw me, was my grandmother, Grace. She was Mom's mother, a retired bakery owner who lived in a cozy little cottage that always smelled like sugar and cinnamon. Weekends at Grandma Grace's felt like stepping into a world where I mattered. She asked about my interests. She praised my effort. We'd play cards at the kitchen table and she'd tell me, "You're smart, Erica, and you've got grit. That's all you need to get far in this world." While my parents were busy chasing Julie's every mood swing and whim, Grandma Grace was teaching me how to read profit margins, how to price homemade goods, and how to believe in my own strength. I never knew at the time, but when she said, "Don't wait for people to validate you. Some lights make others uncomfortable," she was talking about my own mother. By the time I got to high school, I had stopped trying to be noticed. I poured myself into grades, work, and planning my escape. I joined every business club I could find, got a job fixing laptops at a tech shop, and kept my GPA spotless. My mission was simple. My only plan was crystal clear: earn a scholarship to a top business school and never look back. And somehow I made it happen. I graduated as valedictorian and earned a partial scholarship to Boston University's business program. My parents came to my graduation, but left halfway through so they could take Julie to her friend's sweet 16 party. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and pretended it didn't. Sophomore year, everything changed. Grandma Grace passed away. A sudden stroke. No warning, no goodbye. I was shattered. She was the only person who had ever truly seen me, and now she was gone. At the funeral, my mother kept herself busy with floral arrangements and head counts, barely shedding a tear. Julie wept dramatically in the front row, though she had barely made time to visit Grandma in years. 2 weeks later, I received a call from her attorney. Grandma Grace had left me $15,000 and her cherished antique jewelry collection. She made it very clear, the lawyer told me, "These items are meant for you and only you." When I told my parents, the fallout was instant. She was my mother. My mom snapped over the "I should have gotten something." Dad added, "You should at least consider sharing it with Julie. She's struggling with the loss. But for once in my life, someone had chosen me, and even in death, Grandma Grace had shown me I was worthy. I refused to give that up. I could. During the rest of college, I started drifting further from my family. I still called on holidays, visited once a semester, but otherwise I built a new life in Boston, one where I wasn't overlooked. My roommate, Alyssa, became the sister I always wished Julie had. We'd talk for hours about life, goals, and heartbreak. She encouraged me in a way that felt effortless, like breathing clean air after years of living in smoke. Then came Nathan, a brilliant computer science major I met in junior year. He introduced me to the startup scene, the energy of innovation, and the thrill of building something from scratch. For the first time, people believed in me. They saw potential, not just practicality. And with that support, I started to believe in myself too. After graduation, I landed a job at a small tech company in downtown Boston. The pay was minimal. My apartment was tiny and loud, but I made it work. Mom's reaction, "Well, at least you can pay your bills," she said one night, dismissively. "That's all most people can hope for." But I wanted more. Not just survival, impact, growth, ownership. While working full-time, I noticed a gap in the market. Small businesses lacked affordable tools to manage client relationships. Big CRMs were expensive and overwhelming. I started sketching out a solution, streamlined software designed for small teams. I called it Secure Connect. I spent nights and weekends coding the prototype myself, thanks to what Nathan had taught me, and when it came time to fund it, I used every penny of the $15,000 Grandma Grace left me. That seed money was all I had, but it was enough. I officially registered Secure Connect, built the basic version of the platform, and held my breath. The early days were punishing. I worked 9 to 5, rushed home, ate instant noodles, and stayed up past 2 a.m. I ran on caffeine, stubbornness, and the memory of everything I had been told I couldn't do. Alyssa worried. She'd drag me out for dinner just to get me away from my laptop. Nathan, now living in Seattle working for a major tech firm, still picked up my calls whenever I hit a technical wall. We had parted on good terms, and he remained one of my biggest supporters. Then came launch day, and it flopped. The system crashed hours after going live. My first users were angry. I barely slept for 2 days trying to fix bugs and stabilize the platform. At 4 a.m., I found myself sobbing on the cold bathroom floor, whispering to myself, maybe they were right. Maybe I'm not special. Maybe I should have just accepted being average. But then a familiar voice echoed in my mind. "Grandma Grace, you've got a sharp mind and determination. That's enough." I wiped my face, stood up, and opened my laptop. It was time to try again. The turning point came quietly, at a small tech networking event in Cambridge. I was standing near the snack table, pitching Secure Connect for the 100th time, when I caught the attention of Diane Wren, a legend in the industry. She had sold her first tech startup in the early 2000s for millions. Something about my passion, or maybe my exhaustion, must have struck her. She asked for coffee the next day. We met at a quiet cafe. She listened carefully, then said bluntly, "Your product has promise, but your model, too narrow. You're building a cottage when you should be designing a city." That meeting changed everything. Diane became more than a mentor, she became my lifeline. She challenged my assumptions, reshaped my pricing strategy, and introduced me to serious people with real budgets. With her guidance, I landed my first major client, a regional chain of 30 fitness centers. They needed exactly what I had built. That first contract changed everything. The check they cut me, it was enough to quit my day job. I rented a modest office above a bakery in Beacon Hill and hired 2 brilliant recent grads, passionate, hungry, and just green enough to still believe in magic. We worked late into the night, survived on takeout and instant coffee, and toasted every small victory with cheap champagne. We were building something real. Around that time, I tried reconnecting with my family. I sent birthday gifts, made regular calls, and even flew home for Thanksgiving. I wanted them to see that I was doing well, that I wasn't a failure. But nothing had changed. Over turkey and cranberry sauce, I tried to explain my business. I even showed them screenshots of our dashboard, our client metrics. Dad barely looked up. "That online stuff, it's just a fad," he muttered, scooping mashed potatoes. "You should really think about a job with retirement benefits before it's too late." Julie, working part-time at a retail shop while figuring things out, grinned across the table. Not everyone wants to be chained to their laptop 24/7, Erica, she said with fake sweetness. That was the last time I tried to include them in my professional life. Then came Julie's engagement. She met Brian, a real estate agent, and within 6 months they were planning a lavish wedding. My parents couldn't contain their joy. They called me nearly every day with updates: flowers, venues, fittings. The wedding, a grand event at a country club, with champagne fountains and a designer gown. My seat, a corner table with third cousins and kids from the groom's church group. Mom appeared briefly to ask if I was enjoying myself, then she vanished again, chasing Julie's bustle and centerpieces. 1 month later, Secure Connect won a national award for innovation. A tech magazine featured my journey bootstrapping a startup, solo female founder's success against the odds. Suddenly my phone wouldn't stop ringing. "We saw you in a magazine," Mom said, her voice uncharacteristically bright. Everyone at my office was so proud. I told them you were always into computers. A lie, of course, but I didn't correct her. They started calling more, showing interest, talking about visiting, and casually dropping hints. "Dad's new commission plan is tough. The roof might need replacing. Julie and Brian are having trouble with the mortgage." It was obvious. Part of me wanted to help. A tiny, desperate voice still hoped for love in return. But I didn't. Instead, I focused on what I had built, on what was real. I bought myself a condo in a historic Boston brownstone. For the first time, I had a home, not just a place to sleep. Hardwood floors, tall windows, a mantel where I placed Grandma Grace's antique clock. I hosted a housewarming party for the people who had been there all along. Alyssa, my team, my mentors. My parents declined the invite. "It's a long drive," they said, but they had driven to Boston twice that same year, for shopping weekends with Julie. Standing in that living room, surrounded by friends and laughter, I had a quiet realization: I didn't build this life for them. I built it for me, and it was more than enough. When my 34th birthday arrived, the autumn air was crisp and golden. I had no big plans, just peace, and for the first time ever I didn't feel like I was missing anything. My 34th birthday was perfect in the simplest way: a peaceful morning jog along the Charles River, brunch with Alyssa and a few close friends, and dinner at my favorite little spot on Newberry Street. The sky was clear, the air crisp with that golden New England chill. Exactly the kind of fall day that makes Boston feel like a dream. I wasn't expecting gifts, so when Alyssa handed me a small, carefully wrapped box, my heart softened. "It's nothing fancy," she said with a smile as I peeled back the paper. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a slender charm. On it in tiny etched letters were the words, "She believed she could, so she did." I looked up at her, tears quietly pressing at the corners of my eyes. "It's perfect," I whispered, pulling her into a tight hug. It was exactly the kind of gift my mother had never given me, not in thought, not in spirit. Later that night, back in my apartment, a little wine-softened and full of warmth from the day, I noticed something new in my mail pile. A certified envelope. Return address, Connecticut. My parents. For a second I smiled. Maybe they had remembered my birthday. Maybe this was finally a sign that things were shifting. I signed for it, opened the envelope, and felt everything inside me drop. One single page, thick stationery. My mother's favorite kind, the kind she used for Christmas letters and formal invitations. I read it once, then again, then a third time. "Dear Erica, your father and I have decided to revise our estate plan. After thorough reflection, we've concluded that everything, assets, property and financial accounts, will go to Julie. She has a family to support and is in greater need of assistance. You've been fortunate in business, though we're both aware that much of your success came from luck and support from others. We are notifying you now to avoid any confusion later. No response is necessary. Regards, Martha Shaw." No greeting, no birthday wishes, no love, just regards. Like I was a business partner being notified of a company merger. The paper shook in my hands as the quiet of my apartment made the letter echo even louder in my mind. They had erased me, not just from a will but from meaning, reducing my career to life, disregarding my struggle, dismissing my sacrifices. I sat down, unable to breathe deeply, the page trembling between my fingers like a cruel joke played too late. I called Alyssa the moment I found my voice. "I don't care about the money," I said between shaky breaths, but the way they said it, like I'm undeserving, like everything I built was just chance. Who does that to their own child? Alyssa didn't skip a beat. "People who don't deserve you, that's who." "Erica, I know it's hard to say this, But this is emotional abuse, and it's been happening your whole life. I didn't reply to the letter. What was there to say? Their minds were made up. Their message was clear: you are not one of us. So I went back to doing the only thing I could control, building my legacy. If they wanted to chalk my success up to chance, I would build something so undeniably powerful, so unshakably mine, that even they would choke on the word luck. I poured myself into work. Longer hours, bigger clients, fiercer goals. I told my team to push boundaries and rewarded every spark of innovation. About 3 weeks after that letter, I was doom scrolling through social media on a late Friday night, when I saw a post from a distant cousin, something about my father's health. A heart issue, the first I'd heard of. I paused, concern tugged at me, uninvited. Should I call? Should I ask? Then I remembered that letter, the closing line: no response necessary. A few days later, while picking apples at the farmer's market, I ran into Barbara, an old friend of my mom's from college. She'd lived in Boston for years and we ran into each other now and then. "Erica, sweet girl," she said warmly, "I heard about your father. That must have been a shock. Will you be at the will reading next week?" I blinked. I wasn't invited. Her face dropped. I'm sure it was just an oversight," she offered awkwardly. We both knew it wasn't. They weren't just cutting me out. They were trying to erase me completely. That week, I couldn't sleep. Not from sadness, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. How did I end up in a family that punished success? Had I truly been such a failure in their eyes, that they would exclude me from something as serious as the reading of my own father's will? Was I that disposable, that invisible, unable to shake the weight of it? I did something I hadn't done in years. I called the house, my childhood home, the one that had grown quieter in memory the more distant I became. My mother answered on the fourth ring. "Shaw Residence," she said with the same formal tone she used for telemarketers. "Mom, it's Erica." I said, "I heard about Dad's condition, and the will. Why didn't anyone tell me?" There was a pause, long, hesitant, full of cold calculation. "We didn't want to burden you. You're always busy with your little company," she said flatly. "Little company," I repeated, stunned. "Mom, I manage a team of nearly 30, and I'm never too busy for serious family matters." She barely acknowledged it. The reading was just a formality. Like I said in the letter, everything's already decided. No need for you to get involved. Then came the final slap. "I have to go now. Julie and Brian are coming for dinner," and she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone still pressed against my ear, trying to breathe, but it felt like all the air had left the room. This wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about money or assets. This was my mother making it explicit that I was no longer part of their definition of family. That night, I sank into a long bath, uncorked a bottle of wine I'd been saving for something special, and cried harder than I had in years. Quiet, breathless sobs that left me hollow. But like always, once the tears were gone, I planned. That's what I'd always done, channel pain into purpose. The next day I called my attorney and revised my will. I removed my parents. I removed Julie. I allocated those funds instead to launch a scholarship for first-generation young women in business. If my family wanted nothing to do with me, fine. I'd pour my love and resources into others who needed it. 3 months later, I received a text, not a call, from a cousin. "Uncle Richard passed last night. Funeral is Saturday. First Methodist." That was it. No message from my mother. No word from Julie. Just a second-hand notification that my father had died. Grief is never straightforward. But grief for a man who once called you his world and then erased you is something else entirely. Part of me mourned the father who taught me to ride a bike and patched up my skinned knee. Another part mourned the cold truth that he had died without ever making amends. Should I go? Would they see my presence as disrespectful? Would it cause a scene? I didn't know, but I went anyway. Not for them. For me to say goodbye. The church was familiar faces from my childhood lined the pews. I quietly slid into a seat near the back, away from the front row where Mom and Julie sat. A few people nodded. Most didn't meet my eyes. The rift was obvious and no one wanted to get caught in it. I watched them both. My mother sat like stone, clutching a tissue but never once crying. Julie, in contrast, wept openly, her head resting dramatically on Brian's shoulder. I couldn't tell if her grief was real or just well rehearsed for the. A wave of guilt came over me for thinking that, but the doubt was there and it lingered. At the reception, I stayed near the fringes, exchanging quiet hellos and stiff hugs. Whispers floated around me about the house, the will, how generously my father had taken care of Julie. I was gathering my things when Brian intercepted me near the coat rack. "Hope you're not planning to contest anything," he said coldly, leaning in. "The will's airtight." Richard made sure of it. I blinked, stunned. This was a funeral. "I'm here to say goodbye to my father," I replied. "Nothing more." He sneered. "Sure, the prodigal daughter shows up late and expects a piece. Just remember you walked away a long time ago." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked out. I didn't say goodbye to my mother, not to Julie, not to anyone. The drive back to Boston blurred behind teary eyes and a blaring radio. I needed the noise to drown out the ache. The following Monday I buried myself in work. By some twist of timing, an unexpected opportunity appeared. A potential partnership with North Star Tech, a massive player in enterprise software. One of the country's leading software companies had shown serious interest in acquiring secure. Their initial outreach had come during my father's decline, and I had pushed off serious discussions out of respect for the emotional chaos I was navigating. But now I embraced the distraction full. Every day became a whirlwind of due diligence meetings, valuation reviews, and legal negotiations with North Star Tech. Their acquisition proposal was substantial, but I negotiated hard, not just for myself, but for the team that had stood by me through every chaotic launch and bug fix. After 2 months of intense back and forth, the deal was finalized. North Star would acquire Secure Connect for $4.7 million. My team would be guaranteed positions for at least 2 years, and I would walk away with financial freedom enough to never work again if I chose not to. The night the final signatures were inked, I sat in my living room, champagne in hand, the city lights glowing through the windows. I should have felt victorious, but instead I felt hollow. No phone calls from family, no congratulations from the people who had watched me build from nothing. Just me, alone with my thoughts. I raised my glass toward the antique clock on the mantel. "Grandma Grace's. To you, Grandma. You believed in me when no one else did." With my newfound freedom, I decided it was time to create a life I didn't need to escape from. I bought a house, a real one, in an upscale Boston neighborhood. Something with space, light, and a garden. Grace would have adored. I hired an interior designer to help make it feel like home. Warm, curated, peaceful. Everything the house I grew up in never was. A month after I moved in, Boston Business Magazine ran a profile on me. From basement startup to multi-million acquisition, the rise of Erica Shaw. The article focused on my vision, my grit, and the scrappy origins of Secure Connect. Not a single line referenced family support, because there wasn't any to mention. 2 days after the magazine hit shelves, a plain package showed up at my door. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Inside was a collection of my childhood things. Old photos, faded school awards, a bracelet I'd forgotten I left behind. No note, no explanation, just remnants of a life someone else had chosen to discard. It felt less like a peace offering and more like a final transaction. My mother's way of saying, "Here's what's left of you. Take it, you're not ours anymore." That night, I opened a browser and booked a 3-week trip to Europe. I needed time, space, a break from the shadows of the people who only acknowledged me once I made headlines. And Europe gave me everything I needed. I wandered through the narrow alleyways of Florence, stood alone before the canvases of Van Gogh, and sipped espresso in Parisian cafes without anyone asking me what I did for a living. No one cared about my net worth or my press clipping. I was just Erica, a woman finally breathing in her own story. When I landed back in Boston 3 weeks later, I felt weightless, healed in places I didn't know were still bruised. I spent the first Sunday back putting things in order, unpacking souvenirs, responding to work emails, and enjoying the warmth of my house as the autumn sun poured through the tall windows. The doorbell rang at 11:30 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, probably a neighbor or a delivery, I figured. But when I opened the door, the breath left my body. My mother, standing next to her, were Julie and Brian, all 3 of them awkwardly dressed, as if unsure whether this was a visit or an intervention. They looked like strangers on a film set they didn't belong to, out of place against the elegant backdrop of my new life. "Erica," my mother said, stiff and composed. "May we come in?" I hesitated, then, out of sheer social instinct, stepped aside and let them in. They entered my home slowly, their eyes sweeping over the high ceilings, curated decor, and floor-to-ceiling shelves, lined with titles that likely intimidated them. Wow, Brian muttered. Business must be booming. His voice had that familiar tone, half impressed, half resentful. I ignored it. Coffee, I offered, my tone clipped but polite. No thank you, dear, my mother replied, settling stiffly on the edge of my sofa like it might bite her. Afraid to fully settle in, my mother perched on the edge of the sofa like she might need to bolt at any moment. We can't stay long. Julie remained standing, arms tightly folded across her chest, her expression stiff and defensive. She looked worn, shadows under her eyes, tension in her jaw, and Brian stood beside her with a possessive hand on her shoulder like he was bracing her. The silence grew long and awkward before Mom finally spoke. Your home is lovely, Erica. Very sophisticated. You always did have expensive tastes. There it was, the first passive-aggressive jab of the afternoon. I let it hang in the air without comment. What brings you to Boston? I asked plainly. You could have called. I might not have been home. We did try calling. Julie, you changed your number. That was true. I'd changed it after the funeral. I was tired of seeing Mom flash on the screen only for it to be a spam call using a spoofed local number. Well, you're here now, I said, folding my arms. So what exactly can I do for you? Mom shifted forward in her seat, straightening her back like she used to when preparing for those so-called family talks from my childhood. Erica, we're in a difficult position, she began, her tone now polished and cool. After your father passed, we discovered that his financial situation was more complicated than we thought. I said nothing. I already had a sinking suspicion about where this was going. The medical bills were substantial, she continued. Insurance only covered part of it. And it needs a lot of work before it could be sold. Julie jumped in quickly, her voice cracking with just enough emotion to feel rehearsed. Brian and I just found out we're having twins. It's a high-risk pregnancy. I may need to stop working sooner than expected. I glanced between the three of them. Mom, Julie, Brian, watching the pieces fall into place. It was like listening to a pitch you already knew the ending to. That sounds challenging, I said evenly. I'm sorry you're going through a tough time. Mom leaned in now, voice lowering, as if appealing to some shared code. We saw the articles, Erica. About the sale. We know you came into a lot of money. The bluntness was jarring, no attempt at tact. No soft landing. My finances are private, I replied sharply. But that's just it, Brian cut in. Family finances should be open, we're family. That money belongs to all of us. I let out a quiet laugh, dry and without warmth. I owe you based on what? Your success came from the values we raised you with, Mom said with sudden indignation. We taught you hard work, discipline, the education we gave you. That foundation is what made all this possible. I stared at her, stunned by the gall. The education I got through scholarships, the work ethic I learned from Grandma Grace, the company I built while you dismissed it as a fake. Mom's mouth tightened. Without another word, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom drama. Your father kept notes, she said. This is a record of a conversation during your college year. You said if you ever made it big, you'd take care of the family. I unfolded the page. It was his handwriting, all right. But the wording twisted, fragments of an old optimistic conversation pulled out of context and framed as a binding promise. Julie started crying then, on cue, mascara smudging at the corners of her eyes. We're going to lose the house, Erica. The house you grew up in. How can you be so heartless? What exactly are you asking for? I asked, though I already knew. What's fair, Brian said with calm certainty. 1/3 of what you earned from the sale. You'll still be set for life. We just want to ensure your mother and sister are secure. I stood up then, not because I was done, but because my restraint was hanging by a thread. Let me get this straight. You cut me out of the You didn't invite me to Dad's reading. Barely spoke to me at the funeral. And now you show up demanding a share of the business I built with zero help from you. This isn't about the past, Mom replied coolly. It's about family responsibility. Then you should leave, I said, my voice low and controlled. Not until this is resolved, Brian interjected. We've already spoken to a lawyer. That verbal agreement, your promise, it's binding in Connecticut. I blinked. You're suing me? We're not threatening, Mom said. We've already begun the process. I walked to the door and opened it. Get out. They didn't move. Erica, be reasonable, Julie pleaded. Think of the twins. They're innocent in all this. The manipulation was so obvious it would have been laughable if it hadn't been so deeply insulting. "I'm calling my lawyer," I said, pulling out my phone. "And if you don't leave right now, I'll call the police next to remove you from my property." Brian shot up, grabbing Julie by the arm to haul her to her feet. "You'll regret this," he snapped. "Blood is thicker than water." "Apparently not in this family," I replied coldly, watching them shuffle toward the door. I dialed Gregory Wilson, my attorney, the same one who had expertly handled the North Star acquisition. He picked up on the second ring, and I immediately switched to speaker. "Gregory, my family is here making threats," I said, my voice steady. "They're demanding a third of my company's sale proceeds, claiming I promised to support them based on a verbal agreement." Julie, Mom and Brian froze in the doorway. "Erica, make no statements and do not acknowledge any claim." Gregory's voice echoed crisply through the speaker. "What they're alleging has zero legal weight, unless supported by substantial evidence. I'll meet you first thing tomorrow to go over this. For now, tell them to leave. Any further communication should come through me." I looked up from my phone. "You heard him," I said simply. "Please leave. And from now on, direct anything you have to say through my lawyer." They left without saying another word, but the damage had already been done. The calm and clarity I'd rediscovered in Europe had been pierced, leaving behind the fog of a fight I never asked for. The following morning, I walked into Gregory's office downtown. Normally the sweeping views of Boston Harbor and polished wood paneling might have brought me comfort, but not that day. I placed everything I had on the table. My father's so-called transcript, all correspondence from my family for the past 5 years. Gregory scanned it, frowning. "This is nonsense," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "They're dressing up blackmail as family loyalty. There's no enforceable verbal contract here." "Could they still file a lawsuit?" I asked, the worry clear in my voice. "Anyone can file a lawsuit," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "The question is whether it holds up in court, based on this. Unlikely, but let's prepare like it's going to trial, just to be safe." 2 days later, a formal letter from Thompson and Blackwell, an obscure firm in Hartford, arrived in Gregory's office. My stomach churned as I read the language. According to them, I had created a reasonable expectation of financial support through ongoing verbal assurances, and my success, despite being built independently, somehow belonged to the family unit. "They're not bluffing," I said, exhaling slowly. "They're delusional," Gregory corrected, "but that doesn't mean we underestimate them. I'm hiring an investigator to look into their background. If this isn't the first time they've pulled something like this, we'll find it." What the investigator uncovered sent a chill down my spine. 3 years earlier, my parents had gone after a distant cousin, who had won a small lottery payout. They claimed, once again, that family had a claim to his winning. That case ended in a private settlement, low 5 figures according to court documents. "They've done this before," I said, stunned. "They're professional opportunists." But it didn't end there. I decided to go through a few boxes I had kept from Grandma Grace's house. In them were her tax records, loan receipts, and personal letters. What I found changed everything. There were multiple IOUs and bank statements showing my parents had borrowed heavily from Grandma Grace over the years with no signs of repayment. But most damning was a letter she'd written to her lawyer before her death. In it, she clearly stated her intention to leave everything to me, not to her daughter. She described my father's long-standing gambling addiction, and detailed how my mother had spent decades covering up the financial black hole he created. She feared any inheritance would disappear under the weight of their poor choices. Gregory read the letter silently, then looked up. "Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing," he said. "She protected her legacy by putting it in your hands. Armed with everything, documents, history, testimony. We began preparing for the preliminary hearing. Gregory contacted my mentors, including Diane, to provide sworn statements confirming I had built Secure Connect without a single ounce of family support. He compiled bank records, traced the business development timeline, and drafted a response so airtight it would smother any claim before it could breathe. I had never received a single cent from my parents after high school. Not for tuition, not for housing, not even a birthday check. Gregory and I were fully prepared to present Grandma Grace's records if it came to that. The day of the hearing arrived. A strange mix of dread and quiet resolve settled over me as I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning the navy blue blazer I had specifically chosen to project seriousness, not success. No flashy jewelry, no designer heel. I needed to look like someone the court could trust, not the caricature my family had painted. The courthouse loomed ahead, a towering monument of stone and silence, echoing with every step. Inside I spotted my mother Julie, and Brian conferring with their attorney near the entrance to the courtroom. When our eyes met, they looked away cold and dismissive. Their attorney presented their case first, and to say it was outrageous would be an understatement. He painted a vivid picture of heartfelt promises and deep family sacrifice. According to him, I had made repeated pledges to buy my parents a retirement home, fund Julie's children's college tuition, and share the fortune I allegedly owed to the people who made me who I was. It was theatrical nonsense. My mother took the stand, clutching a tissue she didn't need and recounting an entirely fictional version of our relationship. She claimed they had hired tutors, bought me specialized software, and paid for business courses, things that had never happened. She went on and on about how they had made every sacrifice for me, her voice trembling as she said, "We just want what Erica promised, what any grateful daughter would do for her family." Then came Julie, with her carefully rehearsed story of hardship, how they were about to lose their home, how her pregnancy was considered high risk, and how her children's future depended on my generosity. I kept my face still, neutral, but inside I was burned. It was painful to hear, not just because it was all a lie, but because they were so willing to weaponize it against me. When it was our turn, Gregory took the floor calmly, methodically dismantling their narrative. He presented my scholarship records, my full-time employment during college, the hours logged in labs and libraries. Then he brought in Diane to testify, my mentor, who confirmed that every inch of my company was built through my own efforts and with seed money from my grandmother. Next came the records, the loan documents showing how my parents had borrowed from Grandma Grace for years without repayment, the correspondence showing their earlier attempt to extract money from a cousin who had won the lottery. Then Gregory's voice rang out clearly through the courtroom. "Your Honor, this is not a case of a family seeking fairness. This is a pattern of behavior deliberate, manipulative, and predatory. My client built her life from the ground up with no material support from the plaintiffs, and the so-called promises they reference were never made." The judge, a silver-haired woman with keen eyes, had been listening intently. Her expression never wavered. She turned to my mother. "Miss Hayes, these financial records raise serious concerns about your credibility. Can you explain the failure to disclose the previous settlement with your nephew, or the unpaid loans from your mother?" My mother faltered. She tried to speak but only stammered. Their attorney tried to object. The judge immediately overruled him. "Furthermore," she continued, "even if the court believed these conversations happened, and I remain unconvinced, they would not constitute a binding legal agreement under Connecticut law." Then she looked at, her voice softened, but it held firm authority. "Miss Shaw, family conflict is never easy, but this court sees no legal obligation on your part. You are not required to support adult family members who excluded you from their own legal documents and failed to communicate with you in good faith." With that, she dismissed the case. It was over. Gregory gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "They have no claim now. It's done." I nodded, but as I glanced over and saw my mother's face twisted in fury and Julie's slumped shoulders trembling under the weight of embarrassment, I realized something. The court had ruled in my favor, but some wounds go far deeper than In the hallway outside, as I thanked Gregory again for everything, my mother appeared. She pulled me aside. Her face was red, her voice low and filled with restrained rage. "You humiliated us in there," she hissed. "Was it really necessary to bring up all that ancient history?" she muttered. Not meeting my eyes, I studied her, truly studied her. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at her as a daughter seeking approval. I was looking at her as a woman, one whose flaws were finally visible under the harsh light of truth. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by her own exposed intentions. "Why did you really cut me out of the will, Mom?" I asked softly. "Was it really because Julie needed more? Was it just punishment for not needing you?" Her face flickered, anger replaced by something more honest, more human. "You were always so self-sufficient," she said bitterly. "Even when you were little, you didn't need me the way Julie did. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To have a child who can take or leave you?" I nodded slowly. "So you rewarded her dependence, and punished me for standing on my own." Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "You were already enough," she whispered finally, her voice cracking. "That was the problem. You didn't need us. You made us irrelevant." And there it was, the truth I had been chasing my whole life. Her love had never been unconditional. It was rooted in being needed. Julie's chaos made her feel useful. My independence made her feel replaceable. I would have included you in my life, I said quietly, if you had ever cared about who I am, not just what I could provide. She didn't reply, just turned away. Julie approached next, her eyes bloodshot, her voice soft. You got what you wanted, she said. You proved you're better than us. Happy now? I sighed. This was never about proving anything. This was about defending myself from people who treated me like a wallet, not a daughter. Julie looked down, her voice barely audible. They told me you promised, that you abandoned us for your career. And you never asked me. I needed to believe them, she admitted. The twins. The bills. I'm drowning, Erica. And you seem to have it all. Despite everything. I felt a small pang of empathy. We had both been manipulated in our own ways. Me by exclusion, her by burden. I won't give you a third of my savings, I said clearly. But I'll set up college funds for the twins. Legal documents, tight boundaries. No open doors beyond that. Her eyes lifted in surprise. Why after everything? Because they're innocent. And because someone has to stop the cycle. In the weeks that followed, Gregory and I set up legally protected trust funds, strictly for educational use. I made it clear to Julie this was a one-time act, not a path to more. But the emotional fallout, that took longer. I began seeing Dr. Rebecca Winters, a family trauma specialist. During one particularly difficult session, she said something that stuck with me. You're grieving the family you deserved, not the one you had. That's a wound that doesn't leave a scar, it leaves a silence. She was right, but I filled that silence with something else, something real. Alyssa, as always, remained my constant. Nathan moved back to Boston, and we picked up a quiet friendship rooted in mutual respect. I surrounded myself with people who understood what family should mean: boundaries, support, truth. And I gave back. I founded the Grace Henderson Foundation, named for the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. It offered grants, mentorship, and seed funding to young women who, like me, had been overlooked but never lacked grit. Our first recipient was a 22-year-old single mother developing a revolutionary childcare scheduling app. Seeing her resilience, her spark, her fire, it mended something in me I didn't know was still broken. I realized, this was the legacy I wanted. Not money, not revenge, but impact, quiet, enduring, and rooted in truth. The following year after the court case, Julie emailed me and asked if we could meet. We chose a quiet little cafe halfway between Hartford and Boston. Something neutral, something safe. I walked in with my guard up, but open to conversation. Julie was already seated, looking calmer, more grounded than the last time I had seen her. She smiled gently and slid a few pictures across the table. Photos of the twins, a boy and girl now 4 months old and healthy. Our conversation started awkwardly but gradually warmed. She told me she'd started therapy. She was finally beginning to understand how deeply flawed the patterns in our family were. Mom hasn't been talking to me much lately, she admitted, stirring her tea. Ever since I accepted your trust fund for the twins and said I wouldn't pursue any appeal, she's been distant. I nodded. Are you okay financially? I asked, careful to keep the question supportive, not suggestive. I wasn't opening another door. We're managing, she said. Brian got promoted and I'm working part-time from home. It's not glamorous, but it's secure. We didn't become close that day. We didn't erase years of competition or pain, but we acknowledged something vital. We could choose to relate differently now. Not as rivals, but as women breaking out of a cycle we didn't create but had the power to end. My relationship with our mother stayed frozen. A month later I received a formal thank you note in her familiar looping handwriting, acknowledging the trust funds I'd set up, but offering nothing more. No apology, no warmth, just a perfunctory note and nothing else. That Thanksgiving I hosted dinner in my own home for the family I had chosen. Alyssa and her husband, Nathan and his partner, colleagues who had become friends, and 2 young women from the Grace Henderson Foundation I'd started. All sat at my table. The house rang with real laughter, honest stories, and the peace that comes from being seen and respected. After everyone left, I noticed a white envelope among the day's mail. Inside was a handwritten card from Julie. Erica, I'm slowly learning that family isn't about DNA, it's about how people treat you. Thank you for showing me what real family looks like.
Happy Thanksgiving, Julie. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. A recognition. A begin. That night I stood outside on the porch wrapped in a thick sweater looking up at the stars Grandma Grace had once taught me to recognize. The crisp November air stung a little, but it felt. I thought about every painful step that had led me here. The rejection, the courtroom, the betrayal, and how somehow I had transformed that pain into purpose. Because in the end, the real freedom had nothing to do with the money. It came from letting go of the desperate need for validation from people who never had the capacity to give it. My worth had never been theirs to define. It had always been mine. If you've ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you, just to protect your peace, know this: you are not alone. Sometimes the family you build is far safer than the one you were born into. Share your experience below if you've ever had to choose your well-being over old expectations. Subscribe for more raw and emotional journeys of survival, strength, and self-worth. Because love should never come with a price tag.